Take your bag and get out! This restaurant is not a shelter!
Please, I only asked for the food they were going to throw away.
I said out! You're disturbing my customers! Then throw me out too, because that woman once saved my life.
The elderly woman stared at the stranger from table 7 as if she had just seen a ghost. Her fingers tightened around the worn brown bag in her hand, and for several seconds, she could not find her voice. The restaurant manager slowly lowered his pointing hand, suddenly aware that every customer in the room was now watching him. The distinguished man stepped away from his table and walked toward the elderly woman, his expression changing from anger to something far more personal. As he came closer, tears began gathering in his eyes. The elderly woman studied his face, searching through years of memories that had long been buried beneath hardship and disappointment. Then the man quietly said, "Mrs. Bennett, don't you remember me?" Her lips parted. He gave her a small, emotional smile and whispered, "It's David. David Cole." The brown bag slipped from her trembling fingers and landed softly beside her feet. Before we continue, stay with this story until the end, because what David was about to reveal would change not only Mrs. Bennett's life, but everyone inside that restaurant. And if you enjoy powerful stories about kindness coming back when you least expect it, subscribe to the channel. Mrs. Bennett covered her mouth with one hand. "David." The man nodded. For the first time that evening, the confident businessman standing before her looked almost like a frightened little boy. "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Bennett blinked rapidly. No, it can't be." "It is." She looked him over again. The expensive charcoal suit, the polished shoes, the silver beginning to show in his hair. Nothing about the man standing before her resembled the thin, nervous 17-year-old boy she remembered. But then David smiled. And suddenly she saw it. Those same deep-set eyes. That same little crease beside his left cheek. Mrs. Bennett's knees weakened. David quickly reached out, not forcefully, but carefully, steadying her elbow. "Easy." The manager, whose name was Mark, stood frozen nearby. He had expected an argument. Maybe a customer complaining about his tone. What he had not expected was one of the restaurant's wealthiest regular customers addressing the elderly woman like someone precious. Mark cleared his throat. "Mr. Cole, I think there's been some misunderstanding." David turned his head. The warmth disappeared from his face. "No." Mark swallowed. David continued. "I think I understand exactly what happened." Mrs. Bennett immediately shook her head. "Please, David, don't cause trouble because of me." David looked back at her. "You still do that?" She frowned. "Do what?" "Protect everybody else when you're the one being hurt." Mrs. Bennett lowered her eyes. David bent down and picked up her worn bag. The restaurant had gone so quiet that even the clinking dishes from the kitchen seemed loud. A waitress named Claire approached hesitantly. "Sir, would she like to sit down?" David nodded. "She'll sit with me." Mark stepped forward. "Mr. Cole, again, I apologize if my employee—" "Your employee?" David looked directly at him. "You were the one shouting." Mark's face tightened. "I was trying to protect the dining experience of paying customers." A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. David's jaw hardened. And she somehow threatened that experience by asking whether food scheduled for the trash could be given to her. Mark glanced around. She was approaching tables. Mrs. Bennett immediately spoke. "I only approached one table because I saw the server clearing untouched bread. I shouldn't have done it." David stared at Mark. "She just apologized to you." Mark said nothing. David continued quietly. "That should embarrass you more than anything I could say." Claire pulled out the chair beside David's table. Mrs. Bennett sat down slowly. She looked terribly uncomfortable. Not because the chair was uncomfortable, because everyone was looking at her. She tucked her hands together in her lap. David took the seat opposite her. "Bring her whatever she wants." Mrs. Bennett immediately shook her head. "No. Soup is enough." David smiled faintly. Still stubborn. "I'm not hungry enough to waste food." Something about the statement hit him. David looked down for a moment. Then he turned to Claire. "Soup. Fresh bread. Tea." Claire nodded. "And please pack a proper meal for later." Mrs. Bennett started protesting. David raised one finger. One argument at a time. For the first time all evening, a tiny smile appeared on Mrs. Bennett's face. Mark quietly walked away. But he was far from finished with them. And David knew it. While they waited for the food, David leaned forward. "What happened?" Mrs. Bennett looked away. "Life." That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. David studied her face. When I knew you, you had a home. You had a job. You had a husband. Her eyes changed. My husband has been gone 9 years. I'm sorry. She nodded. Cancer. David waited. And your house? Gone. How? Mrs. Bennett rubbed her palms together. Our savings disappeared during his treatment. After he passed, I tried to keep the mortgage going on my pension and substitute teaching work. David's brows drew together. You were still teaching? Whenever the district called me. And then, she hesitated. My hip started troubling me. I couldn't stand in classrooms all day anymore. Claire arrived with steaming soup and bread. Mrs. Bennett stared at it, not hungrily at first, almost suspiciously, as though something that simple could still be taken away from her. David noticed. He pushed the bread basket closer. No one is taking it. She looked at him. Then she slowly tore off a small piece. David's throat tightened. He remembered another piece of bread. 42 years earlier. He remembered sitting alone outside Roosevelt High School with an empty stomach. He remembered pretending he wasn't hungry. And he remembered Mrs. Bennett noticing. You really don't remember what you did for me, do you? He asked. She smiled weakly. I taught hundreds of children. You did more than teach me. Mrs. Bennett took another small bite. David leaned back. My father disappeared when I was 14. Mrs. Bennett's eyes softened. My mother had 2 jobs, but there were weeks when we had almost nothing. I remember your mother. You were the only teacher who noticed I stopped eating lunch. Mrs. Bennett lowered her spoon. David's voice became quieter. You started bringing an extra sandwich every day. Recognition slowly entered her face. You told me your husband packed too much food. David laughed once. You really thought I believed that? Mrs. Bennett smiled. You were proud. I was ashamed. That's why I never called it charity. David stared at her. You paid for my field trip. She looked away. You bought my college application forms. She said nothing. You wrote recommendations to 7 schools. That was my job. No. David leaned forward. Your job was teaching English. Mrs. Bennett's eyes filled. You were very bright. I was 1 bad month away from dropping out. David's voice broke slightly. And you knew it. The customers at nearby tables were pretending not to listen. But almost everyone was listening. David continued. The night my mother got sick, you drove me to the hospital. Mrs. Bennett nodded faintly. I remember. You stayed until 2 in the morning. She shouldn't have been alone. Neither should I. That silenced her. David wiped beneath one eye. Mrs. Bennett, I built my whole life on a door you helped me keep open. She shook her head. You built your life yourself. No one does. Her eyes met his. David smiled sadly. We just like pretending we do. From across the room, Mark watched them. He had moved behind the front counter and was whispering to another employee. Claire noticed. She leaned closer to David. Sir. Yes. I think you should know something. Mark looked toward her sharply. Claire hesitated, then lowered her voice. This isn't the first time. David's expression changed. What do you mean? Claire glanced toward Mark. He's thrown people out before. Mark walked quickly toward them. Claire. She straightened. Back to work. David looked at Mark. She was speaking to me. She's on shift. David smiled without warmth. Then perhaps you should let her finish serving your customer. Mark clenched his jaw. Claire looked frightened. Mrs. Bennett immediately reached for her arm. Don't lose your job because of me. Claire looked down at the elderly woman. And something in her expression changed. My mother lost her apartment last year. Mark snapped. Claire. She turned. No. The entire restaurant went silent again. Claire's hands trembled. But she continued. I'm tired of watching you treat people like dirt. Mark's face flushed. You are done. David stood. No, she isn't. Mark laughed sharply. You don't run my staff. Correct. David buttoned his suit jacket. But I do own the building. Mark froze. Mrs. Bennett stared at him. Claire's mouth fell open. Several customers whispered. Mark blinked. What? David's voice remained calm. The company that owns this restaurant leases this space from Cole Property Group. Mark's face drained. David continued. I haven't involved myself in day-to-day tenant matters in years. Perhaps that was a mistake. Mark attempted to recover. Mr. Cole, this restaurant pays its rent. This isn't about rent. David stepped closer. It's about whether the businesses carrying my company's name on their agreements reflect standards I can live with. Mark's voice lowered. You can't terminate a commercial lease because you dislike my customer policy. You're right. David nodded. That would be improper. Mark's shoulders relaxed slightly. So perhaps everyone should stop making threats. David pulled out his phone. I'm not threatening you. He tapped the screen. I'm requesting a full compliance review. Mark's confidence disappeared again. What? Safety, labor practices, lease conditions, employee complaints, everything. Claire looked stunned. Mark stared at her. You've been complaining about me? Claire stepped backward. David moved between their line of sight. Don't look at her. Mark looked at him. Excuse me. Whatever happens next, you speak to me. Mark's fists tightened at his sides. Mrs. Bennet rose from her chair. David. He turned. Sit, please. No. She shook her head. I have eaten. I'm grateful. But this is becoming too much. David stared at her. She gathered her bag. You don't owe me revenge. This isn't revenge. It feels like it. David paused. Mrs. Bennet walked closer. You were always angry when you were afraid. He gave a tiny laugh. You remember that? I taught you for 2 years. She placed a gentle hand on his sleeve. You're angry because seeing me like this scared you. David's eyes softened. She continued. But humiliating him back will not restore my dignity. Mark looked almost relieved. Then Mrs. Bennet turned toward him. However, Mark's relief vanished. Mrs. Bennet looked him directly in the eyes. You should never speak to another human being the way you spoke to me tonight. Mark said nothing. You didn't know me. Her voice was soft. You didn't know whether I had once been rich or poor. You didn't know if I had been a teacher, a nurse, a mother, a widow, or nobody important at all. She paused. And none of that should have mattered. David watched her in silence. Mrs. Bennet continued. A hungry person shouldn't need an impressive past before you decide they deserve respect. No one moved. The words landed harder than any shouting could have. Mark looked away. Mrs. Bennet picked up the packed meal Claire had prepared. Thank you for the food. Then she looked at David. And thank you for remembering me. She began walking toward the exit. David quickly followed. You're not leaving alone. I've been leaving places alone for quite some time. That ends tonight. Mrs. Bennet stopped. Something in his tone told her there would be no argument. Outside, the evening air was cold. David's driver hurried around the black sedan parked near the curb. Mrs. Bennet stopped. No. David sighed. What now? I'm not getting into that thing. It's a car. It looks like a government building with wheels. David laughed. A real laugh this time. Mrs. Bennet smiled. There he is. Who? The boy I remember. He opened the back door. Please. She looked at the warm interior. Then, at her worn shoes. I'll make it dirty. David's face fell. Mrs. Bennet. She looked up. Never say that to me again. She swallowed. David spoke gently. You could walk through that car covered in mud, and I'd still consider it the cleanest thing that happened to my day. Mrs. Bennet looked away, embarrassed by the emotion rising in her face. Finally, she got inside. David entered beside her. Where are you staying? She gave him an address. His driver looked at David through the mirror. David's expression changed immediately. That's a shelter. Mrs. Bennet looked out the window. Yes. For how long? 3 weeks. What happened 3 weeks ago? She stayed silent. David waited. Finally, she said, I was renting a room. And the owner increased the rent. How much? Enough. David stared at her profile. Do you have family? Her hand tightened around the food container. One son. Where is he? I don't know. David frowned. You don't know? He and I haven't spoken in 6 years. Why? Mrs. Bennet's face became guarded. That part of my life is none of your business. David leaned back. Fair. The car continued through the city. But the question stayed with him. Why would a woman who had spent her life helping other people's children be completely alone? When they arrived at the shelter, David's chest tightened. The building was clean enough, but overcrowded. A line of people waited near the entrance. Mrs. Bennet reached for the door. David stopped her. You're not sleeping here tonight. She sighed. We've been reunited for 1 hour, and you're already trying to run my life. I have a guest apartment downtown. No. It's empty. No. It has 2 bedrooms. That makes it twice as no. David rubbed his forehead. You haven't changed at all. I've changed plenty. Not the part that argues. Mrs. Bennet smiled despite herself. David tried again. One night. She shook her head. Then tomorrow we find something permanent. No. Mrs. Bennet. David. They stared at each other. His driver hid a smile. Then Mrs. Bennet said, If I accept one night, there are no conditions. Agreed. You do not buy me a house. David opened his mouth. No. He closed it. You do not start paying all my bills. He looked offended. I wasn't. You were. He sighed. Fine. And you do not treat me like a project. David's expression softened. You were never a project. She looked down. Then one night. David nodded. One night. But life had other plans. The next morning, Mrs. Bennett woke in the guest apartment to the smell of coffee. She walked into the kitchen and found David standing beside a tray. You cook? No. Then why are you in the kitchen? I ordered breakfast. That sounds more believable. David smiled. There were eggs, toast, fruit, oatmeal, and pastries. Mrs. Bennett stared at the spread. Are you expecting 12 people? I didn't know what you liked. I like one breakfast. David poured coffee. Sit. She sat reluctantly. He placed an envelope beside her plate. She immediately pushed it back. No. You don't even know what it is. It's in an expensive envelope. David laughed. It's not money. She eyed it suspiciously. What is it? Information. Mrs. Bennett opened it. Inside were copies of several documents. Her expression changed. Where did you get these? I asked my legal team to look at your former rental situation. Her eyes narrowed. You investigated me? I investigated your landlord. David. Read. She did. The landlord who had forced her out had apparently been cited repeatedly for illegal rent increases, improper notices, and unsafe conditions. Mrs. Bennett looked up. This doesn't mean I want to sue anybody. I didn't say lawsuit. What are you saying? You may be entitled to recover money. She stared at the papers. How much? Potentially several months of rent and relocation assistance. Mrs. Bennett leaned back. For the first time, help did not look like charity. It looked like something that had always belonged to her. David saw the distinction in her face. That's why I did it this way. Her eyes became wet. You remembered. Of course. You remembered I hate being pitted. You taught me the difference between pity and dignity. Mrs. Bennett wiped her eye quickly. Then David's phone rang. He glanced at the screen. His expression became serious. What is it? She asked. The restaurant. She shook her head immediately. Leave it alone. It's not about Mark. David answered. Yes. He listened. Then his face changed. When Mrs. Bennett watched him, David stood. Send it to me. He ended the call. What happened? David looked at her. Claire found something. What? Security footage. Mrs. Bennett frowned. Of last night. Not just last night. David opened a video file on his phone. The footage showed the restaurant's back hallway. Mark appeared on screen speaking aggressively to an older dishwasher. Then another clip. A delivery driver. Another elderly customer. A waitress crying in the kitchen. Another employee being cornered verbally near the storage room. Mrs. Bennett's face slowly changed. David looked at her. This was never just about you. She said nothing. She sent months of footage. Mrs. Bennett looked toward the window. David understood. You still think I should leave it alone? No. Her answer surprised him. Mrs. Bennett turned. If people working there are afraid to speak, then you don't punish him because of me. She tapped the phone. You protect them because of them. David nodded. That I can do. By noon, an independent investigation began. Mark was temporarily removed from management while employee complaints were reviewed. But something happened that David had not expected. The story from the restaurant spread. A customer had recorded part of the confrontation. The video reached local social media, then local news. Within a day, thousands of people had seen an elderly woman being ordered out and a businessman standing up to defend her. But the internet did what it always did. It began searching. Someone identified Mrs. Bennett. Former students started commenting. Mrs. Bennett taught me in 1994. She bought my books when my parents couldn't. She stayed after school every Friday for anyone who needed help. She helped me apply to college. She came to my mother's funeral. She changed my life. David showed her the messages. Mrs. Bennett sat quietly scrolling. Hundreds became thousands. She started crying. I thought they forgot me. David sat beside her. Apparently not. She shook her head. You teach children, and then they disappear into the world. One of them found you in a restaurant. She laughed through her tears. Then one comment appeared. Mrs. Bennett froze. David noticed immediately. What? She covered the phone screen. Nothing. Mrs. Bennett. Nothing. But he had already seen the name. Michael Bennett. David looked at her. Your son. She stood abruptly. I need some air. Mrs. Bennett. Please. David let her go. That evening, someone knocked on the apartment door. David opened it. A man in his early 40s stood outside. He had Mrs. Bennet's eyes. Is she here? David already knew. Michael. The man nodded. Mrs. Bennet appeared from the hallway. The moment she saw him, she stopped. Neither spoke. 6 years of anger stood between them. Michael's eyes filled. Mom. Mrs. Bennet's face hardened. What are you doing here? I saw the video. So did half the country. I've been calling. I changed my number. I know. David quietly stepped away. Michael entered slowly. I didn't know you were homeless. Mrs. Bennet laughed bitterly. You didn't know anything. Michael lowered his head. You told me not to contact you. After you accused me of ruining your life. I was angry. You were 36 years old. I know. Your father was dying and you wanted us to sell the house immediately because you needed money for your business. Michael closed his eyes. David now understood. Mrs. Bennet continued. When I refused, you said I had always chosen other people's children over you. Michael's face twisted with shame. I shouldn't have said that. No, you shouldn't have. I was jealous. Mrs. Bennet stared at him. Of children who needed help? Of everybody. His answer surprised her. Michael stepped closer. You were everybody's hero. His voice shook. Students called the house. Parents stopped you in supermarkets. Kids came to you when they were scared. He wiped his face. And I was stupid enough to think there wasn't enough of you left for me. Mrs. Bennet's anger softened slightly. Michael continued. Then Dad got sick. He swallowed. And I panicked. You abandoned us. I did. The words were simple. No excuses. Mrs. Bennet looked away. Michael said, my business failed anyway. She turned back. I lost everything I was so desperate to protect. He gave a broken laugh. Maybe I deserve to. No mother wants that for her child. I know. He stepped forward. I've spent 6 years wanting to call you and 6 years being too ashamed. Mrs. Bennet whispered. And I spent 6 years waiting. Michael's face collapsed. That sentence broke whatever was left between them. He moved toward her, then stopped. Can I hug you? Mrs. Bennet stared at him, then slowly opened her arms. Michael crossed the room. He held his mother and cried like a child. Mrs. Bennet tried to stay composed. She failed. David watched from the kitchen doorway with tears in his eyes. Later that night, mother and son talked for hours. Not every wound disappeared. Real wounds rarely do. But they finally stopped pretending silence was healing them. 2 weeks later, the investigation into the restaurant concluded. Mark had repeatedly intimidated employees, withheld breaks, altered time records, and ignored complaints. He was dismissed. Claire was offered the acting manager position. When David told Mrs. Bennet, she smiled. Is she ready? She says she's terrified. Good. David laughed. Good. People who are never afraid of responsibility usually don't understand it. Claire accepted. And under her management, the restaurant changed. But she made one change nobody expected. Near closing time each night, untouched safe food that would otherwise be discarded was packaged through a local food rescue program. No one had to beg for it. No one had to stand inside a restaurant and prove they were worthy of eating. David called Mrs. Bennet when the program launched. You started something. No. She smiled. Claire did. Several months passed. Mrs. Bennet recovered money from her former landlord and moved into a small apartment near Michael. She refused every luxury David tried to offer. But she accepted one thing. A job. David had created a foundation offering emergency grants, tutoring support, and college application assistance to struggling teenagers. He asked Mrs. Bennet to help design the program. She stared at him. You're asking a 70-year-old retired teacher to work. Consult. That's a rich person's word for work. He laughed. So. Mrs. Bennet thought about it, then smiled. When do we start? A year later, the foundation had helped more than 800 students. And every student entering the program heard the same rule. Needing help was never something to be ashamed of. One afternoon, David walked into the foundation office and found Mrs. Bennet sitting with a 17-year-old boy. The boy's head was lowered. His clothes were worn. An untouched sandwich sat beside him. David stopped in the doorway. Mrs. Bennet gently pushed the sandwich closer. I brought too much lunch. David nearly laughed. The boy looked at her. Really? Always do. David leaned against the doorframe. 42 years had passed. But some things had not changed at all. Mrs. Bennet looked up and saw him. Their eyes met. She knew exactly what he was thinking. Don't say a word. David smiled. I wasn't going to. Yes, you were. The boy looked between them, confused. David walked away still smiling. Later that evening, Mrs. Bennet and David returned to the restaurant. Claire had reserved table 7. Michael joined them. The restaurant was crowded again. Warm. Alive. Very different from the night they had found each other. Mrs. Bennet looked around. Funny. What? David asked. The worst night I had in years led to one of the best years of my life. David shook his head. That manager didn't give you this life. No. She smiled. But sometimes one closed door forces you to notice another one opening. David raised his glass. To Mrs. Bennet. She frowned. No. To what then? Mrs. Bennet looked around at Claire, Michael, David, and the workers moving happily through the restaurant. Then she lifted her tea. To seeing people. David smiled. To seeing people. Their glasses touched. And somewhere near the kitchen, another untouched basket of bread was being packed carefully instead of thrown away. Because kindness does not always return to us quickly. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes decades. Sometimes it finds us on the very night we believe the world has completely forgotten us. But the good we do has a way of leaving footprints in lives we may never see again. Mrs. Bennet had once thought she was simply feeding a hungry student. She never imagined that boy would become the man who stood up for her 42 years later. And David thought he was simply repaying a debt. But in saving the woman who once helped him, he discovered something even greater. True kindness is never a debt. It is a chain. One person lifts another. That person grows strong enough to lift someone else. And somewhere down the road, the kindness keeps moving. Sometimes all the way back home. If this story touched your heart, tell me in the comments. Do you believe kindness always finds its way back? And if you enjoy powerful stories with emotional lessons and unexpected endings, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share this story with someone who needs the reminder today.